The snow rarely stopped in Zverino, a remote Russian town where time moved slower than the trains that crossed its brittle landscape. Winter wasn't just a season here, it was a way of life, etched into every wooden beam of the cottage-style houses that stood quietly under the weight of endless snowfall. Vladimir was born in one such house on the edge of the village, where the railway track curved around the frozen woods, and the only sounds at night were the low hum of distant freight trains and the creaking of old timber adjusting to the cold. His parents, once brilliant programmers during the tail end of the Soviet era, watched the glory of their professions fade into obscurity as political tides changed. But they held on to their passion through their son. His mother, quiet but persistent, made it her mission to teach him about circuits and resistance. His father, a man of few words but unshakable discipline, showed him the logic of code and the beauty of precision. Each morning, Vladimir walked with his mother through snowdrifts nearly as tall as he was. Bundled in wool layers and heavy boots, he listened as she quizzed him on formulas or asked him how machines think. Each evening, when the world turned darker and colder, his father took over the walking ritual. He pointed to the distant red lights of the railway crossing and asked what sequence of logic could make them smarter, faster, and more efficient. The family had no riches but possessed something rare, a home filled with salvaged computers from defunct factories, soldering kits, and dog-eared technical manuals, all repurposed into tools of wonder. By the time Vladimir was 10, he had written his first application, a motion detection interface linked to an old security camera on their porch. It sent image snapshots to his father's phone whenever triggered. It wasn't perfect. It once mistook a swirling gust of snow for an intruder, and another time captured a squirrel in hilarious high resolution. But it worked. As he grew, so did his ambition. He began building small autonomous systems, some for monitoring temperature and frost, others just for fun, like a remote-controlled sled powered by Python code and an old drill battery. He had no friends, not because he was disliked, but because he didn't fit. While other boys threw snowballs and raced on icy roads, Vladimir was mapping Wi-Fi signals and testing vulnerabilities in public routers. When he turned 21, he was hired by a mid-sized Russian tech company specializing in home security, smart locks, doorbell cameras, encrypted alarms. It was a quiet firm in St. Petersburg with just enough nationalistic pride to be left alone. Vladimir quickly became their rising star. His designs were lean, his code impenetrable, and his innovations caught attention. When a national ethical hacking competition was announced, he entered on a whim. Over 3 days, he bypassed firewall simulations, cracked encrypted datasets, and exposed a flaw in the judging panel's own back-end system, not to embarrass them, but to show how easily such gaps were missed. He walked away with first prize, a modest trophy, and a silent notice of someone watching very carefully from across the ocean. The CIA, always scouting cybersecurity talent from systems they couldn't easily replicate, took note. They studied his upbringing, his company, his isolation, and more importantly, his lack of attachments. No siblings, no spouse, no public affiliations. His parents were gone. His mother from illness. His father from a worksite accident. He had become a man without anchors. A perfect candidate. Not long after, Vladimir boarded a northbound train to Murmansk for a client installation. It was winter, of course, It was always winter there. The train rumbled through white wilderness as night deepened. After midnight, the lights flickered. The PA system went silent. The train rolled to a creaking halt in what felt like the middle of nowhere. Outside, only snow-covered pines and darkness thick enough to swallow light. Passengers muttered. Minutes passed in eerie silence. Then, the power surged. Lights blinked on, heaters groaned, wheels rolled. But by the next station, Vladimir was gone. Years passed. Then, one spring morning, a secure CIA drone setter in Wyoming spotted something unusual. An anomaly buried in drone firmware, too deep to be accidental. It was subtle, elegant, unmistakably foreign. Vladimir, the man thought lost in snow, was alive. Working from inside the CIA. He hadn't been interrogated. He'd been recruited. They gave him a gigantic villa, a contract, and a deal, unlimited resources, full clearance, and freedom to build anything if he renounced his past and vanished from Russian records. Vladimir accepted. For years he designed systems that scanned cities for audio frequencies, predicted threats using biometrics, and deployed silent malware that left no trace. Inside the agency he became a quiet legend, brilliant, loyal, invisible. Or so they thought. One day, during a routine shift change, he walked out of the facility. Cameras showed him strolling casually. He didn't return. 3 hours later, he crossed into Mexico under a false identity, escorted by calm men with Russian tattoos. He was flown to a hidden airstrip, then across the Atlantic. In Russia, he wasn't arrested. He was applauded. The KGB had planned it all. They had made him visible to the CIA. The job, the contest, the isolation, it had been a breadcrumb trail. They let the Americans take him, knowing he'd become their inside eye. Now he had returned not just with secrets, but with code buried deep in US infrastructure. Code that could be silently activated to observe, manipulate, or cripple. The boy from Zverino had become the ghost in the world's most secure systems. The Americans believed they'd turned him. But Vladimir hadn't turned. He had circled. Now, back in the snow-covered edges of Russia, he continued to build. But this time, the world would never see him again. Only his codes would. Enjoyed listening to this espionage thriller? Subscribe to Sci Tech Vault for more.